Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? I'm Sue, and the 7th anniversary of Epic 7 is finally upon us, and with it, Smilegate and Super Creative are doing something really special. They're giving out a free copy of Genesis Ras to everybody. That's a souped up version of the game's main character for absolutely free. And they're also giving the players a choice of one of the game's 5 antagonists from the game's main story for free. The question is, which of the 5 do you choose? So in this video, I'm going to go over all 5 episode bosses and talk about the pros and cons of each, so that way you can make an informed decision and choose the best character for your account. Just so that way you feel like I'm not clickbaiting you, here is my personal tier list on your screen. Zio is my #1 overall character, but I think that there's something to be said about all of these characters. Unlike most Moonlight 5-star characters in Epic 7, the boss characters are pretty special in that they are usually uniquely powerful. They do something that no other character in the game does, and they're pretty good in multiples. Every single boss character that has ever been released has multiple builds, so I will talk about each of those builds in this video, and again, all of their pros and cons. If you just want to click off the video and just see my actual takes, like what I think is the best one, it's Zio. But I promise you, it's not as clear cut and dry as it appears to be on this tier list. So without any further ado, let's jump into it and let's talk about each of the characters and why you would take one over the other and talk about how to play them. So let's start with my favorite amongst all of the boss characters, and that is Belian, the episode 3 boss. Belian's primary feature is this passive here, Shackles of Suppression. She decreases the amount of souls acquired by the enemy by 100%. And if I just jump over here to Zio, you can see his artifact is Ancient Book. It makes it so that his team starts with 20 souls. A very popular strategy in PvP in this game is to stack a bunch of souls at the start of the fight and then use those resources to gain an advantage and quickly win the game. Belian completely shuts that off. That is her primary feature. That said, because she is an Ares Knight, she is also obscenely tanky compared to the average character in Epic 7, which gives her a great amount of flexibility. On top of that, by the way, she has this S1, which is an AoE attack with debuffs attached to it, and then she has an AoE provoke. So she can function kind of like a debuffer, a tank, a DPS. She is by far the most flexible out of every single character we will talk about in this video. Now, I think she is tied for the second best overall option, but that hinges on one specific thing. You see, back in 2024, Epic 7 collabed with the anime Overlord, and with it, we got this artifact called 3F, which is Albedo's artifact. There is a world of difference with this character between having 3F and not having 3F. The meta build, as you can see on your screen, is on counter immunity with the artifact 3F, and you just build as much defense and health as possible with the speed at over 170 and the effectiveness over 50 if you can get it, but that is not necessary. So you can see this is basically the quality of the gear, right? This is how you would build Belian on 3F. And it is just an obscenely powerful build because she is super tanky. As you can see, this is like as tankier than most people's main tanks on their account. And then 3F makes it so that whenever she attacks, she deals extra damage based on how tanky she is. So you don't need to build damage stats. This artifact just turns your tank stats essentially into damage stats. And since she could only AoE, it just does an obscene amount of damage to the entire enemy team. Now, if you don't have 3F, there are other options for you. Again, Belian is very flexible. You can build her as like a fast debuffer to combo with characters like, say, Sea Phantom Politis, or like maybe even Ambitious Tywin. I've seen that as like a very common thing to play in Guild Wars and Arena. So you can build her as like a super fast debuffer. You could still build her as a bruiser / DPS. Even without 3F, it just requires the artifact Elber's Ritual Sword. And I'll show you here. This is kind of what the stats look like. As you can see, it's not nearly as tanky. I have to give up a little bit of defense, a little bit of health, a little bit of speed, a little bit of effectiveness, so that way I could kind of meaningfully make up for the damage that I don't get from 3F. So again, it's not totally hopeless if you don't have 3F. And there's 2 other builds that you can play. Similar stat line to the one that's on your screen now, the counter one, but instead of playing counter set, you play injury. I think that one is a little bit outdated, but you still could play it. I think characters like Urban Shadow Shu, for example. I don't know if I actually have Shu geared at the moment, but yeah, so Shu is basically kind of made that build obsolete. And you also have characters like Death Dealer Ray, which are a little bit better for injury. So if that was kind of your goal to go for an injury build, it's still there. I just think there's better options. And of course, there's the tried and true option of just putting her on the Aureus artifact, putting her on protection set with immunity, making her base speed and just making her as tanky as possible, and actually playing her as a tried and true tank. So Belian, if you're just unsure of what to take, is probably, in my opinion, the second best overall option for you, just because of how flexible the character is, and she has a uniquely powerful passive. I think she really excels towards people who like to play standard or slower playstyles in PvP. If you're more of an aggressive player, there's a lot of better options, I feel like, that we'll talk about, starting with this next one here. And I think this is going to be like the fan favorite, the one that most people are going to want to take, and it's Straze, or Straze as some people in the community call him, even though they're wrong. So this character, essentially what makes him tick, aside from, you know, being super cool looking, is this move right here, Star Extinction. So it is a very powerful AoE attack, but it singles out the highest health character that it's being hit by and does massive extra damage to them and penetrates all of their defense. Star Extinction pretty easily kills the highest HP target of whatever it's fighting in PvP. So whatever their tank is, their bruiser, this thing basically just one-shots it, which is very, very good. And then he has an exclusive equipment, which mine rolled terrible, don't judge me. When the enemy is defeated by Star Extinction, he gets an extra turn of invincibility and an extra turn, which allows him to immediately go into Destructive Gaze, which is another powerful AoE attack that does more damage when the opponent has less people on their team. So you kill one guy with Star Extinction, you get an extra turn, you Destructive Gaze. At that point, he's basically wiped out an entire team by himself. He's very squishy, but very, very strong. Super glass cannon character. If you're somebody that likes to play very aggressively in PvP with characters like, say, maybe like an Ahmed or NIKKE, right? Like if you like to play these kinds of characters, if you're very fast, very aggressive, Straze is probably going to end up being the pick for you. That said, he does have another use. The question is how useful will it be long term? So how I've played this character for the last 3 years, give or take, is as a hunt farming character. Straze is the best hunt farming character in the game. Like, no questions asked. He just does ridiculous damage, even versus boss characters. You can build him base speed on rage set with a ton of damage, and he can just one-shot Golem, Wyvern, Banshee, Azimanic. There's even like some other content that like hard PvE content where he could just one-shot the boss with proper setup. So that gives him a lot of value to PvE players, like min-maxers for PvE. The thing is, as I'm recording this, it is the end of August, right at the start of the 7th anniversary. 2 weeks into the 7th anniversary celebration, we will be getting a new difficulty of hunt. And based on the mechanics of that hunt, Straze might be out of a job for farming for PvE, because you're not going to want to farm the current hardest difficulty when the new difficulty that's coming out in 2 weeks has significantly better rewards. So if he loses his job in those hunts, if he's no longer the best farming character, then he's really just relegated to being a PvP cleaver for things like Arena and World Arena. So I think if you want to take this character, the primary focus should be because you are a cleaver or an aggressive player and you're looking for somebody that can just mow down tanky units in those game modes. Otherwise, I are on the side of caution and only really take Straze if you are just a completionist and you don't have him, you like his aesthetic, or you just want to, you know, take the smart route and hold your selector for as long as possible to see if you can find out if he's actually going to be good for those stages. Otherwise, I would pass on him. Next up is Archdemon Shadow, which I think is probably the weakest option for most players out of all of the characters. What makes Archdemon Shadow unique, and I use unique loosely because all these other characters have something unique about them. What made Archdemon Shadow originally unique was she was the only character with the seal debuff. which, as you don't know, if you don't know right there, it's on your screen, right? Passive skills effects do not activate. So you could turn off enemy passives with her basic attack skill. The problem is that then they released the New Moon Luna over here, and they also released NIKKE, right, which is this character. And these characters just also have the seal debuff in their kit, despite not being a boss character. So Archdemon Shadow kinda, you know, lost her role. That said, they did give her an exclusive equipment, which guarantees that her basic attack skill pulls your highest attack character, making her function very similar to like Adventurer Ras or Camilla if you followed any of my Abyss guides. So you have a character that essentially generates DPS on your team with her basic attack skill and can also basically steal passives, and you could soul burn to ignore ER to guarantee it. So that's kind of the value on Archdemon Shadow. It's all connected to that basic attack skill. Like her other moves like Dissolution, it's fine. It's an AoE defense break that you have to charge up before you can actually do anything with it. But everything really comes down to Touch of Chaos. You're basically picking this character because you really need a seal character because you just don't have New Moon Luna. You're looking for like a hard counter to Afternoon Soak Flan, for example, right? If you're looking for answers to problematic passives, that's the main reason to choose Archdemon Shadow. Now, as for how you build her, there's a couple of ways. As you can see, I'm on counter immunity because I'm just trying to maximize my chances of sealing. Usually people will try to kill the Archdemon as fast as possible because they don't want their passive sealed. They don't want to have to deal with the extra dual attacks. That's what the counter set is here for, to kind of minimize the risk that this character undergoes. If they're going to just focus it down, then you're going to hopefully get some kind of value out of it. No matter how you choose to play the character, by the way, Artifact is going to be Fairy Tale for a Nightmare, or just play Ancient Book. Souls is never a bad thing on any mage. Now, if you want to just go full aggro and don't care about if your opponent's going to try and focus it down, I would highly recommend just going for speed immunity and playing like 260, 270, and just play your own book and try to go as fast as possible. Soul burn, get the seal, get the dual attack, get all the value out of the character like ASAP. Very, I think, underplayed and underrated character. I know, like, I'd say like a year ago when she first got the exclusive equipment, she was a lot more popular. She was basically everywhere. But this character, I feel like, is often slept on and forgotten because even I am just like, damn, dude, I need a seal character, but Luna's banned or Luna's taken and there's just no other good seal characters. And I always forget that this character exists. She is a very strong character. She's just a bit more niche. You have to kind of have a setup with the team. Kind of have to know, like, okay, like this is where I could slot her in. You can't just pick her every game, which is why if you go back to that original tier list that I had her under counter pick because you kind of just can't slam her every game. You have to know, yeah, this is a good game for Archdemon. I can see that I'm going to have a lot of success when pairing her with this DPS, and she's going to be good at selling these characters, so on and so forth. Next up is Harsetti, who is probably the most divisive character in the game's entire history. And I would say that Harsetti is tied with Straze and Belian as like the second best overall pick. And unlike Straze or Belian, I think no matter what kind of player you are, you will get inherent value out of Harsetti. Whereas like Straze favors aggressive, Belian favors defensive characters, Harsetti can work for both. And that is because of her passive here at the Law of Skuggheim. As you can see at the start of the battle, speed of the caster is fixed going forward, and speed of all heroes except for the caster is limited to a maximum of 90% of the caster's speed. So, translation, Harsetti goes first unless your opponent has the next character that we're talking about, and then the turn order is shuffled, and then everybody moves at the same speed for the rest of the fight, with Harsetti being slightly faster than everybody else. So she is one of two characters, the other being Zia, that we're going to talk about, that basically guarantees you have turn one. Epic 7's PvP is basically dominated by the speed stat. Speed is the most important stat in the game. It dictates everything. Having a character that basically says your speed is worthless will always inherently have a lot of value. Now, the reason I don't rank this character as highly as Zia, who we'll talk about in a second, is because of two things. One, Zia is a lot more flexible. We'll talk about that in a second. And two, Harsetti is significantly easier to counter than Zia. The developers have even said that Harsetti has been a major pain point for them in terms of balancing. They've suggested nerfs. They've tried to propose exclusive equipments that never actually materialized and went through. They've tried to do a lot to gatekeep Harsetti, releasing multiple characters over the last year and change that are designed to be hard counters to the character. So for things like Guild War defense, arena defense, this character is not the titan that she once was. But she is still a very good character. It is very, very hard to argue with a character that has a defense break S1 with a guaranteed follow-up, is always AoE attack, can shut down things like buffs, counterattack, strip your opponent, and then also restrict their speed. And she's also a character that is got the tankiest stat line out of all of the mages in the game. So the character is just inherently tanky, has debuffs, is AoE, like very similar to Belian when you think about it, right? She could be built super bruiser, which is how I play her, right? I play her as like an injury bruiser because most people, if they are not trying to just outright hard counter Harsetti, they're trying to play these big tanky bruisers that don't need speed to function, and that's what the injury is here for. It's designed to counter that playstyle. Like, if you're gonna let me have Harsetti and not hard counter and try to play me straight up, then I'm gonna try to counter that playstyle with injury. And that is the most common way to play the character, but with a twist, right? As you can see, mine is injury with crit chance and crit damage. Another way that you could play it, I should say, is you could play it tanky, no crit damage, and then you play Effectus and you use the artifact as Abyssal Crown. I'm using Fairy Tale for a Nightmare to maximize the damage that I get out of my S1s whenever it's Harsetti's turn. But you can't go wrong with like Abyssal Crown, Magic Bubble Maker. Hell, even, Ancient Book is not a bad option. Character has a lot of flexible artifacts. You could build her on, say, like Destruction full damage if you just want to go for a DPS. Or you could just go like 6 health and just make her as tanky as possible. Immunity isn't really needed on her because unless you're playing against Zio, who already gets through immunity, you have turn 1, so immunity is basically worthless on her, in case you're wondering why that is. But overall, if you're like a newer player or just somebody that really can't deal with speed, I think this is a character that's just very important to have in your back pocket. Because if they're not going to ban Harsetti in a PvP setting, right? Or your opponent, you see your opponent's like got a defense on like Guild Wars or Arena, and it's very fast, like it's a cleave team. You could just take Harsetti and it just robs them of so many stats. It robs them entirely of certain strategies. That will always inherently have value, no matter how many hard counters they actually introduce to this character. The character could literally die, right, after her first turn, and I still feel like you get value out of the character because of the fact that it shuffled the turn order, the fact that you still at least got some debuffs, some damage on the character, and kind of disrupted their strategy. So yeah, Harsetti is definitely one of the top picks here for most people watching this video. And that brings us to the little child that could here, I guess, at the end, which is Zio, which, as I stated at the beginning of the video, is my #1 overall pick for this selector. And that is because even if your opponent has Harsetti, Zio is literally the I have turn 1 button, period. Right? So if you read his passive here, Supreme Authority, at the start of the first battle, increases combat radius by 20%. So as long as he is within 20% of the speed of the first character, the person who's going to have the first turn, you take the turn. So I'm around 270 speed here, which means that my opponent would essentially have to be like almost 230 speed to outspeed my Zio, which is very unrealistic for 99.99% of all players in Epic 7. So as long as Zio is on like a moderate amount of speed gear, it is insanely difficult for your opponent to outspeed this character unless they just they take their fastest character and stack a bunch of speed imprints. Having a character that literally guarantees you turn 1 in 99% of cases is just so strong in this game. The biggest pain point for myself and a lot of other players is speed. Not having speed really hurts. Having a character that normalizes the speed, like we talked about the Harsetti, is invaluable. Zio, I think, is a bit harder to counter and shut down than Harsetti, and he also lets you do a bit more things, right? Harsetti has combos with things like Afternoon Soak Flan, or you could just play her with like a bunch of bruisers, right? That's a thing that you could do. Zio opens up a whole like play style and a half for you if you don't like if you actually have the character. Obviously, if you are a aggressive fast player, having Zio guarantees that you have turn 1 and allows you to kind of just like dictate the match without your opponent having any ability basically to contest you. So if you are a cleaver, you take Zio, you know your opponent is never going to try to race you. Like that's just a thing that's not happening. That's obviously going to be very valuable to you. If you're a turn 2 player, you could just completely shut down the speed strat. That's invaluable to you. But for like the people in the middle who like to play aggro, like the midpoint between just straight up tank down and cleave, you have the ability to aggro pivot. So you could take Zio on 3 and you play him on book specifically, so that way he could kind of combo with other characters. And now in your 4th and 5th pick slots, you have a lot of flexibility. If your opponent doesn't take any cleansers, you could take a character like Silverblade Araminta, or you could take a character like Pirate Captain Flan. And because Zio basically combos with their CR push passives, he just turns into a starter for control teams. That's very, very strong. You could also have him go in the 3rd slot and then have characters like Requiem Rowana or any other cleave character like, say, Ludwig, right? They can use their books. You could stack their books with his and just follow up for a cleave strat that way. Successor Teiyu, who's a character I don't have. Again, Zio sets that character up, allows you to cleave through an entire enemy team. So he lets you kind of pivot on a dime and turn from a slow player into an explosive cleaver with just himself and like one other competent damage dealer. And that to me is why he's my #1 pick. He just, the inherent ability to be a great setup for cleave, a great counter pick for turn 2, and then also opening up a whole new playstyle of just an explosive aggro pivot is why he's my #1 overall pick. And I've been rambling about him for a bit now, but I'm playing a full DPS Zio. That doesn't even take into account that there's 2 whole other builds that all work in the, you know, various different styles. You can go full effectiveness, like 200 effectiveness and no damage on the character whatsoever, which is super easy to build, by the way, right? The character is just really easy to build in general, but that build in particular, you just speed hit and he's just off to the races. Just build him like 180, 200 effectiveness. That just guarantees that he gets the silence turn 1 and allows you to kind of just do your thing, not having to worry about anything. But I guess the hardest version to play of the character is kind of the midpoint. Usually you drop the defense and health, but you play like 100 and change effectiveness while still having some amount of damage. Again, I'm a turn 2 player, so for me, damage Zio is more important because if I'm taking Zio, it's as a counter pick and I need him to like actually be able to potentially carry in certain situations. But if you're like an all-rounder, you could build him as a mix of damage and effectiveness, or if you're just like somebody who wants to play control or you're a cleaver, just go full effectiveness, speed hit. So yeah, a little bit rambly, a little bit long-winded, but those are my thoughts on all of the boss characters. If you guys still have any questions or anything like that, let me know down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer as many as I possibly can, or just hit me up on Discord. I'll try to answer again any questions you have about the boss characters. Again, my final rankings look pretty much like this. Zio, I think, is just the best overall choice for most players. If you just don't know what to take, I don't think you can go wrong with Zio. After that, it's Belian, Harsetti, Straze. I think they're all equally good for the reasons we talked about in the video. And then Archdemon is probably the worst, unless you just don't have 3F, in which case then Belian is probably the overall worst. But yeah, that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week. Catch you in the next one. Later now.